The hush of Arlington National Cemetery was more than silence. It was reverence carved into every stone. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood in flawless stillness, watched over by a lone guard. His boots struck the marble with measured rhythm. 21 steps forward, rifle at his shoulder, turn, pause, 21 steps back. Each movement echoed a century of sacrifice. Each breath carried the weight of honor. Visitors stood behind the barrier in quiet awe. Parents held their children close. Veterans removed their caps, and tourists lowered their cameras. This wasn't a performance. It was a living promise to those who never returned. The sun reflected off the marble, giving the guard an almost statue-like aura, unmoving, unshaken, unbreakable. But then, the stillness fractured. A ripple of chatter moved through the crowd as someone pushed forward. He didn't walk like a tourist, and he didn't stand like a man paying respect. He carried himself with swagger, shoulders rolling, chin high, every step announcing his presence. Behind him trailed a small entourage, friends, a cameraman, and even a portable speaker pumping out a beat that felt alien in this sacred ground. This was Alex Chen, Kung Fu champion, viral sensation, and self-proclaimed master of combat. He wore a black silk jacket embroidered with golden dragons, his belt tied high, and every motion rehearsed for maximum attention. Where others bowed, their heads in silence, Alex smirked and surveyed the scene like a stage awaiting his performance. Phones lifted higher, whispers grew louder, and eyes shifted uneasily between the solemn guard and the flashy intruder. Alex's cameraman adjusted the lens, clearly prepping for a viral clip, and then, in a voice loud enough to break the sacred, "Hush," Alex declared. "People say this guard is unshakable. A symbol, a soldier carved in stone. But I say, let's see what happens when discipline meets real skill." Gasps rippled through the audience. Mothers turned their children away. Veterans stiffened, their jaws clenched. The guard, however, didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't even shift his gaze. Yet the air had changed. The stage was set. The silence of Arlington was about to collide with arrogance, and every single person there could feel the storm that was about to break. Alex Chen wasn't just any visitor. To the online world, he was a star. His channel boasted millions of followers who tuned in weekly to watch him dismantle opponents in martial arts demonstrations and sparring sessions. He was a 3-time Kung Fu champion, a man who thrived on applause and the adrenaline of being watched. But here, in front of the tomb, his motives weren't respect or curiosity. He was chasing another viral moment, and he was willing to create chaos to get it. Alex's outfit alone screamed spectacle. His black silk jacket shimmered in the sunlight, embroidered with golden dragons curling across the sleeves. His trousers, loose yet sharp, gave him the classic Kung Fu silhouette, elegant yet imposing. Around his waist gleamed a wide sash, knotted perfectly, the kind seen in tournaments rather than on sacred ground. Even his shoes, soft-soled, designed for swift kicks, looked out of place against the marble steps. Beside him, his cameraman adjusted equipment with the precision of someone used to filming stunts. A long boom mic swung overhead, picking up every murmur from the crowd. 2 of Alex's friends hyped him up, whispering jokes and egging him on. The small Bluetooth speaker hanging from one friend's shoulder pushed out rhythmic beats, more suited for a nightclub than this hallowed space. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered, trying to identify him. "Isn't that the guy from YouTube, the Kung Fu champion?" A few recognized him and raised their phones, eager to capture whatever was about to unfold. Others frowned, visibly offended by his intrusion. Veterans in the crowd exchanged looks, hard, unamused, and tight-jawed, but Alex thrived on attention. The unease in the air only fueled him. He spread his arms wide, bowing dramatically to the crowd as though stepping into an arena. Then, with a sharp snap of his hands, he dropped into a horse stance, his legs planted firmly, fists poised at his sides. His entourage cheered, clapping and shouting encouragement, their voices jarring against the solemn backdrop. "Watch closely," Alex shouted. His voice rang against the marble, loud and arrogant. "This guard, this statue in uniform, he's been called untouchable. But discipline and repetition aren't the same as skill. Martial arts, real martial arts, is about adaptability, about mastering the human body. That's what I represent. The guard didn't move. His eyes remained fixed forward, posture flawless, rifle balanced against his shoulder. He was the embodiment of composure, trained to withstand distraction, defiance, even disrespect. Alex smirked. See that? Nothing. He can't even acknowledge me. But let's see if he can keep his balance once he feels real power. Gasps escaped from several onlookers. One mother pulled her child back, whispering, "Don't watch this." A veteran, in a wheelchair, clenched his fists on the armrests, veins showing on his forearms. A young soldier in the crowd muttered under his breath, "This is going to end badly." But Alex wasn't listening. He began moving fluidly, his body swaying with rehearsed grace. He spun into a whirlwind kick, stopping inches from his cameraman's lens, then punched forward in a blur, letting out a sharp ki that echoed unnervingly against the walls. His movements were flawless, textbook kung fu. Every stance crisp, every strike precise. To the casual eye, it was impressive. To his fans, it was mesmerizing. But to those who understood discipline in combat, it was arrogance, masquerading as art. Colonel Ford, standing near the barrier, watched with a grim face. His chest was adorned with faded campaign ribbons, his bearing unmistakable even out of uniform. He had seen young men like Alex before, brilliant, talented, but consumed by ego. He muttered to a nearby veteran, "He doesn't understand where he is or who he's dealing with." The veteran nodded, his eyes locked on the guard. That soldier's not going to react, not yet. But when he does, he let the sentence trail off, but the meaning was clear. Meanwhile, Alex's performance escalated. He leaped into a spinning heel kick, his silk jacket fluttering dramatically, then transitioned into a low crouch, his fist slamming the ground with a crack. Rising, he pointed at the guard. "Look at him," Alex roared, still frozen. Still pretending discipline is enough, but a fighter. He tapped his chest. A fighter lives and adapts. You can't just march and salute and call that strength. You need skill, agility, real power. And that's what I bring, the crowd murmured, unease turning to anger. Some whispered prayers, others lifted their phones higher, sensing they were about to witness something unforgettable. The guard, however, remained statuesque. His boots were perfectly aligned, his rifle angled at the precise regulation degree. His jaw was steady, his gaze unshaken. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't betray even the faintest reaction, and that, more than anything, unnerved Alex. For all his theatrics, for all his flourishes, he was receiving no acknowledgement. No validation, no reaction. His smirk faltered, just for a moment. But then his entourage shouted encouragement again, and his ego surged back. He straightened, cracked his knuckles, and with a grin that carried both arrogance and challenge, he stepped closer to the barrier. The air grew tighter. The veterans bristled. Mothers shielded their children. Phones tilted forward like dozens of eyes focusing on one impending clash. Alex Chen, Kung Fu champion, had made his choice, and every heartbeat that followed pushed the scene closer to eruption. The murmurs in the crowd thickened into a low, uneasy hum. What had begun as a simple display of arrogance was edging toward something more dangerous. And among those gathered stood Colonel James Ford, retired Marine, his posture still carrying the rigid dignity of decades in uniform. Though he no longer wore medals or rank, his presence radiated authority, the kind earned only by years of service in combat and command. Colonel Ford had come that day for the same reason countless veterans did, to honor the unknown soldier, to feel that sacred stillness, to remember comrades who never came home. He'd chosen a spot near the barrier, watching the guards' measured movements with the reverence of a man who knew the cost of such discipline. But now, with Alex Chen's swagger and loud declarations poisoning the air, Ford's jaw tightened. He had seen this type before. Young men with skill, young men with pride, young men who thought combat was a sport. Alex paced near the barrier, his dragon-embroidered jacket glinting in the sunlight. He smirked at the unmoving sentinel, raising his voice for the cameras. He doesn't react because he can't. He's trained to stand there to look tough to scare people with silence, but silence doesn't win fights. I do. The guard's eyes, locked forward, didn't flicker. The precision of his march had not wavered once since Alex had arrived. Yet the air seemed heavier with each word, as though the marble itself resisted this intrusion. Ford stepped forward, not climbing past the rope barrier but moving close enough for his gravelly voice to carry. "Son," he said firmly, his tone cutting through the chatter like a blade. "You don't know what you're playing with." Alex glanced at him, eyebrows raised, faint amusement dancing across his face. "And who might you be? Another fan of the statue in uniform?" Ford's gaze was steady, his voice calm but commanding. "I'm a Marine, 30 years of service. I've led men in combat, buried brothers in Arlington, and stood guard over more than one body that never made it home. That soldier you're mocking isn't here for a show. He's here for a promise, and you don't have the faintest idea what that means." The crowd fell quieter, sensing weight in his words. Even Alex's entourage, still filming, shifted uncomfortably. But Alex chuckled, bowing mockingly. "With all respect, Colonel, I know combat too. I've been in tournaments across the world, faced opponents from every discipline, karate, judo, Muay Thai. I've studied the body like a weapon. This guard, he's just routine." Ford's jaw hardened. He took one step closer, his eyes narrowing. "Routine? Son, that man's routine is life and death. He's not trained for points or trophies. He's trained to react faster than you can blink when his brothers' lives depend on it. You call yourself a fighter because you've been cheered in arenas. He doesn't get cheers. He gets silence, and sometimes a folded flag." A hush fell deeper over the crowd. A few veterans lowered their heads in grim agreement. One whispered, "Tell him, Colonel." Alex's smirk lingered, but his eyes flashed with irritation. He wasn't used to being challenged verbally. His fame, his confidence, his entourage usually insulated him from such confrontations. Still, he lifted his chin. "So you're saying he could take me? That a man who just marches and salutes has the edge over years of martial arts mastery?" Ford didn't flinch. "I'm not saying he could take you. I'm telling you he already has. Before you even lifted your fist. Because while you fight for pride, he fights with purpose. And purpose beats pride every damn time." The crowd reacted, murmurs, nods. The shifting of feet as people felt the sting of the truth in Ford's words. Alex bristled, running a hand over his silk jacket as though brushing off the weight of that statement. Purpose doesn't stop a punch to the chest. Purpose doesn't block a strike. I came here to prove that discipline is nothing without adaptability. I'm going to show everyone watching the difference. The cameraman zoomed in, hungry for the conflict. Alex's entourage grinned nervously, half excited, half aware of the storm brewing. Ford shook his head slowly. "Son, listen to me. If you cross that line, you're not just disrespecting this soldier. You're dishonoring every name carved in this ground. And I promise you, when he answers you, it won't be with a point sparring move. It'll be with the kind of strike that ends fights before they begin." For a fleeting moment, Alex hesitated. The colonel's voice carried too much conviction to ignore. His confidence wavered, a flicker of doubt shadowing his eyes. But then his cameraman whispered, "This will blow up, man. Millions of views." His entourage cheered, "Show him what Kung Fu is really about." And Alex's ego returned in full force. He laughed loud and brash, shaking his head at Ford. "You talk about honor, about silence, about duty. But I live in the real world. And in the real world, skill wins, speed wins, precision wins. Watch closely, Colonel, because I'm about to prove it." The veterans in the crowd grew tense, their bodies stiffening as though preparing for battle themselves. Mothers whispered prayers. Children clutched parents' hands. The marble steps seemed to echo with an anticipation that cut deeper than words. Colonel Ford exhaled slowly, his gaze locked on Alex. "Then God help you, son, because you're about to learn a lesson the hard way." And with that, the stage was set. The warning had been given. But arrogance had drowned out wisdom. The next move would belong to Alex, and the price would belong to him. The hush over Arlington felt unnatural, like the air itself recoiling from what was about to happen. Families clutched children closer. Veterans stiffened, their instincts prickling. The tomb guard, Sergeant Marcus Hale, continued his ritual. 21 steps, paused, turned. His face remained a mask, but behind that stillness lay a storm. Alex Chen rolled his shoulders, loosening his arms, the ritual of a fighter preparing for combat. His entourage whispered encouragement, their voices barely containing excitement. "Do it, man. Show them." Mike, the cameraman, adjusted his lens, heart pounding, not from fear but from the anticipation of viral gold. Every second captured here would be replayed 1,000,000 times online. Colonel Ford's warning still lingered, sharp as a knife. But Alex brushed it off. He was a world champion. He had fought in arenas packed with thousands, faced martial artists from across the globe and never once faltered. A soldier trained to march and salute? That didn't scare him. It only fueled his arrogance. He stepped closer to the velvet rope, his dragon-emblazoned jacket fluttering in the autumn breeze. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alex called, raising his voice for maximum effect, "you're about to see why Kung Fu is more than tradition. It's domination." He dropped into a low horse stance, his body a coiled spring of muscle and precision. The crowd stirred, phones lifted higher, breaths caught in throats. A mother whispered harshly to her teenage son, "Don't cheer. This isn't a game." But the boy's wide eyes betrayed a fascination he couldn't suppress. Alex launched into a dazzling display, sweeping kicks that sliced the air inches from the rope, spinning strikes that whistled with speed. A blur of forms drilled over 2 decades. His movements were art, beautiful, controlled, mesmerizing. Gasps rippled through the audience, admiration tangled with unease. Then, in a single motion, Alex snapped his fist toward Marcus, stopping inches short, the wind of the strike brushing against the soldier's chest. The crowd jolted. Veterans muttered curses under their breath. Phones zoomed in closer. "See?" Alex smirked, drawing back his hand. Wide open. He doesn't even flinch. In a real fight, this would be over before it started. But Marcus remained unmoved. His eyes locked forward betrayed nothing. His breathing never quickened. His rifle rested steady against his shoulder. He was the embodiment of control, a statue carved from flesh and bone. Colonel Ford's voice boomed, firm and unyielding. "Enough, son. Step back," but Alex wasn't listening. The crowd's energy was intoxicating, every gasp and murmur feeding his ego. He turned back toward them, gesturing dramatically. "Stillness equals defeat. Movement equals life. Let me show you the difference." The cameraman nodded eagerly, whispering, "This is it. This is the moment." With a sudden burst of speed, Alex crossed the line, not just metaphorical but literal. He ducked under the velvet rope, his sneakers squeaking on marble as he closed the distance to Marcus. The air cracked with tension. Security officers lunged forward, radios crackling, but they were too slow. Alex struck. His fist shot forward in a straight-line punch, every ounce of his training behind it. It wasn't a sloppy blow meant for show. It was sharp, controlled, devastating, aimed squarely at Marcus's chest. The sound of impact echoed off the stone walls, a thud that seemed to vibrate through the air. The crowd gasped collectively. Phones wobbled in trembling hands. A child screamed. Veterans surged forward, barely restrained by instinct and the barriers in place. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Marcus swayed slightly under the force, a thin trickle of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. But his eyes, calm, unwavering, shifted. They locked onto Alex with the sudden, chilling intensity of a predator awakened. Alex stepped back, triumphant grin plastered across his face. He raised his hands to the crowd like a victorious fighter. "See that? Nothing." No reaction. Just a man in a costume. Ceremony, not combat. But the shift in the air was unmistakable. Veterans in the crowd leaned forward, muttering, "Oh, he's done now." Colonel Ford's eyes narrowed, knowing exactly what was about to unfold. Because Marcus Hale was no statue. No parade ornament. No hollow uniform. He was a soldier forged in the crucible of war. Carrying training meant not to entertain but to end threats in an instant. The silence deepened, thick enough to smother. The tourists, the children, the veterans, all of them knew, without words, that the line had been crossed. And now the tomb guard would answer. The punch still echoed in the air, a hollow thud reverberating across the marble plaza. Gasps rippled through the crowd like shockwaves. For a moment, the only sound was the flutter of flags above and the clicking of security radios. Alex Chen stood tall, chest heaving with triumph, his smirk wide as if he had just claimed another victory belt. He raised his hands like a performer taking a bow. "See that?" He shouted to the crowd, his voice ringing with arrogance. No counter, no reflex. Just a statue in a uniform. This is why combat athletes dominate, because we know how to strike. But something was different now. Something primal. The atmosphere had shifted. Marcus Hale's eyes, still locked forward until that instant, snapped to Alex. And in that single glance, the crowd felt the shift from ritual to reality. His gaze was sharp, not angry, but terrifyingly focused, like the narrowed eyes of a predator zeroing in on prey. Alex's grin faltered for the first time. The rifle in Marcus's hand dropped with a sharp metallic clatter against the marble floor, the bayonet ringing like a bell. Gasps turned into murmurs, and every veteran in the crowd tensed as if muscle memory demanded they prepare for combat. Marcus moved, not with the sluggishness Alex had imagined of a ceremonial guard, but with explosive surgical speed honed in battlefields where hesitation meant death. His right hand darted forward, no flourish, no wasted motion. Just a straight, compact strike, fingers curled, aimed with deadly accuracy at Alex's solar plexus. The blow landed with a sickening thud. Alex's breath exploded from his lungs in a violent whoosh, his diaphragm locking in spasm. His knees buckled instantly, his arms clawing at the air as he staggered backward, gasping for oxygen that refused to come. His eyes went wide, panic washing over his face. He wasn't in a ring anymore. He wasn't under lights with referees and crowds cheering. He was in a fight for control of his own body and losing. The audience froze in stunned silence. Phones lowered. The arrogant champion who had strutted moments before was now bent, gasping, trembling, but Marcus wasn't done. With fluid precision, he stepped in closer, executing a perfect leg sweep that knocked Alex's feet from under him. The martial artist hit the marble with a sharp crack, his championship belt skittering away like a discarded trinket. The sound of the impact was final, a punctuation mark. Marcus loomed over him, his stance calm, controlled. Not the aggressive posture of a brawler, but the disciplined readiness of a soldier. He placed his boot lightly but firmly near Alex's shoulder, pinning him in place without cruelty, without flourish. "Stay down," Marcus said, his voice low, steady, the first words he'd spoken all day. "Breathe slow," the words carried across the plaza, their calmness more chilling than any shout. Alex wheezed violently, his face pale, eyes glassy with shock. His entourage, once brimming with bravado, froze in place. Jake, the boldest, took a half-step forward, fists clenched before Marcus's gaze swept to him. That single glance rooted Jake where he stood. His bravado evaporated. "No trouble, man," he muttered, raising his hands. Colonel Ford stepped forward, her voice slicing through the tension like a command drill. "That's enough." She looked to the crowd, her words firm but resonant. "What you just saw wasn't performance. It was a reminder. These guards aren't actors. They are combat soldiers. Elite. Trained not for applause but for survival." The truth hit like a hammer, parents explained in hushed tones to children. Veterans stood taller, pride flickering in their eyes. The crowd that had come for spectacle now understood they were witnessing something sacred. Alex coughed, finally managing a shallow breath. He struggled to sit up, clutching his chest. His voice was weak, broken, but desperate. "How? I've fought 15 years. Full contact. Nothing. Nothing ever felt like that." Marcus retrieved his rifle, returning to parade rest as though nothing had happened. His face betrayed no satisfaction, no anger, only discipline. But it was Colonel Ford who answered Alex. "Different training," she said evenly. "You fight for points. He fights for survival. That strike, it doesn't earn medals. It ends threats. One move, one result." The words rang heavy in the air. Security officers rushed in, their radios buzzing. The lead officer, a stocky man with a buzz cut, approached Alex, who was still struggling to his feet. "Sir, you're under arrest for assaulting a serving soldier on federal ground. That's a serious offense." Alex's arrogance was gone. He nodded faintly, wincing as two officers steadied him by the arms. His eyes darted to Marcus, no longer with disdain but with respect and fear mingled together. "I didn't know," Alex croaked, voice raw. "I thought you were just ceremonial." Marcus's eyes flicked toward him briefly, the faintest nod given, his voice quiet but cutting. "Most people do. They see the uniform, not the soldier." The crowd shifted, murmuring. A young woman in a Georgetown hoodie spoke up. "Why don't they tell us this in the brochures?" Colonel Ford smiled faintly, pride softening her stern features. Because the tomb speaks for itself. Every sentinel is a volunteer. Less than 20% pass the training. They memorize history, endure inspections harsher than any arena. And yes, they train for combat. Their silence isn't weakness. It's discipline. Alex's shoulders slumped, his earlier bravado gone. As the officers began to lead him away, he paused, looking one last time at Marcus. His voice cracked, but sincerity rang through. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I misjudged you. Badly. Marcus didn't move from his stance, didn't break the rhythm of his discipline, but his eyes flickered briefly, another faint nod given. It was the kind of acknowledgement soldiers gave one another. Not for apology, but for recognition. The officers escorted Alex toward a waiting vehicle. His entourage trailed behind, heads lowered, cameras forgotten. The belt he had flaunted minutes before was scooped up silently, no longer a symbol of pride, but of hubris. The crowd slowly dispersed, their steps softer, their voices quieter. A father leaned down to his son, whispering, "You saw it, didn't you? That guard, he's not here for show. He's here for them." He gestured toward the endless rows of white headstones. The boy nodded solemnly, clutching his tiny American flag. Colonel Ford lingered, watching the scene settle. She turned to Marcus, offering him a respectful nod. "Well handled, Sergeant." Marcus resumed his march, 21 steps, pause, turn. The ritual continued, unmarred, eternal. The blood at the corner of his mouth had dried, but his focus was unbroken. He was not there for glory. He was there for duty. Alex, seated in the back of the security vehicle, winced with each breath. His chest ached, but his pride ached more. He stared out the window at the tomb shrinking in the distance. His mind replayed the strike, the swiftness, the inevitability of it. And for the first time, the champion realized what true combat meant. It wasn't in the medals. It wasn't in the applause. It was in silence, in sacrifice, in the unwavering discipline of men like Marcus Hale. As the vehicle rolled away, Alex muttered to himself, almost like a prayer. "I've been fighting for medals. They fight for something bigger." The words would stay with him forever. The security vehicle pulled away from the marble steps, carrying Alex Chen into the folds of consequence. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was reverent. The tourists, the veterans, the families, they lingered, reluctant to leave. What they had just witnessed wasn't a street fight, nor a clash of egos. It was something deeper. It was a reminder that some places, some people, are untouchable, not because of physical strength alone, but because of what they represent. Marcus Hale resumed his eternal march. 21 steps, pause, turn. His movements were as measured as they had been hours earlier, yet the crowd looked at him differently now. Before he had been background, an ornament to a monument. Now every step echoed with new weight. Every pause seemed like a heartbeat of history. Colonel Ford lingered near the edge of the crowd. Her sharp eyes scanned the faces before her. Awed children, teary-eyed mothers, proud veterans standing taller than they had in years. She could see it. The lesson had landed. The foolish spectacle had transformed into a powerful teaching moment. She allowed herself a breath of relief. "Colonel," a young reporter, microphone trembling in hand, edged closer. "Do you think this will go viral?" Ford's lips tightened. "I don't care if it does," she said firmly. "What matters is whether people understand what they saw. This isn't about humiliation or dominance. It's about respect." The reporter swallowed hard, nodding. He didn't press further. Meanwhile, inside the police vehicle, Alex sat with his head bowed. The fight drained from him. His chest still ached where Marcus had struck him. It wasn't just the pain of bruised ribs. It was the pain of realization. For years, Alex had lived in applause, in rings where cameras loved him and crowds adored him. He had measured strength by trophies, belts, and viral clips. But now he knew there was a strength he had never touched. His friend Jake, seated across from him in the van, finally broke the silence. "Man, I thought you had him." "I really did, but..." "That guy, he wasn't even trying." Alex raised his eyes, still glazed with shock. "He didn't need to try. That's what scares me. I've trained for fights my whole life, but he trains for something else. Something heavier." Jake leaned back, sighing. "You're gonna be all over the news. This is bad, bro, like career-ending bad." Alex pressed his forehead against the cool glass, watching the tomb shrink in the distance. His voice came low, almost broken. "Maybe it should be. Maybe I needed this. Back at Arlington, Colonel Ford gathered the remaining crowd. She wasn't obligated to speak, but she felt compelled. They deserved context. "You've all seen something today most never do," she began, her tone steady but edged with pride. "That soldier you witnessed, Sergeant Marcus Hale, he isn't here for ceremony alone. Every sentinel at the tomb of the unknown soldier is hand-picked. They volunteer for this duty, and less than 1 in 5 pass the training." The crowd listened, rapt. Even the restless children stilled. They memorize 700 pages of history verbatim. They endure months of inspections where even a single thread out of place can mean failure. They train in silence, in discipline, and endurance. Their shoes are built with metal heels, so every click against marble is sharp, precise, deliberate. Nothing is accidental. A teenage boy in the front raised his hand timidly. "But ma'am, why do they do it? Why go through all that just to march?" Ford's eyes softened. She gestured toward the endless rows of headstones beyond. "For them, for every man and woman who never made it home, for the unknowns whose names are lost but whose sacrifice endures." The guard silences their voice. Their march is a promise that America remembers. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A veteran saluted, lips pressed tight against emotion. As dusk settled over Arlington, Marcus continued his vigil. The torches along the plaza flickered to life, bathing the marble in gold. He did not waver. The bruise forming at the corner of his mouth didn't slow him. His lungs still burned faintly from Alex's punch, but he ignored it. Pain was temporary. Duty was eternal. Colonel Ford watched from the shadows for a while longer, then turned away. The guard needed no audience. His devotion wasn't for them. It was for the fallen. Elsewhere, Alex sat in a holding room awaiting processing. His phone had been confiscated. His entourage scattered. The silence pressed down on him, heavier than any crowd's roar. For the first time in years, Alex felt small. Not because of failure, but because he finally saw how narrow his world had been. He thought of Marcus's calm, the way he had struck with precision, then stepped back without gloating. There had been no ego in the soldier's movement. Only purpose. Alex whispered into the emptiness. "I thought I knew strength, but I've only known show." The words hung in the sterile air. He wasn't sure if they were confession or revelation, maybe both. By the next morning, headlines exploded across social media. Clips of Alex's punch, Marcus's counterstrike, and Colonel Ford's speech spread like wildfire. But the tone was different than Alex's team had hoped. The captions weren't about Alex's skill. They weren't about martial arts. They were about respect, about the sanctity of the tomb, about how one soldier had shown the world the difference between fighting for applause and fighting for something eternal. Veteran groups praised Marcus. News anchors replayed the footage with solemn commentary. Schools discussed it in classrooms, and Alex? He became the cautionary tale, the man who thought his championship gave him dominance only to be humbled by silence. Yet even in humiliation, Alex found something unexpected. Messages flooded his inbox, not of mockery, but of reflection. Young fighters admitted they'd been arrogant too. Parents thanked him for unintentionally teaching their children respect. Veterans, surprisingly, didn't spit venom, but instead urged him to learn, to grow. For the first time, Alex saw a path forward not in belts, but in humility. He thought of Marcus Hale again, standing unbroken in the glow of Arlington's torches. He thought of that whispered command, "Stay down, breathe slow." And for once in his life, Alex listened. The week after Arlington was the longest of Alex Chen's life. He returned to his apartment in Los Angeles, but the walls felt smaller than ever. His trophies lined the shelves. Golden figures frozen mid-kick, belts shining under the dim light. For years they had been his pride. Now they felt hollow, reminders of a life lived for applause instead of meaning. Social media had chewed him up. Clips of his humiliation replayed endlessly. The world labeled him the fighter who lost to silence. But beneath the noise, Alex noticed something he hadn't expected. People weren't just mocking him. Many were asking questions about the tomb, about discipline, about the difference between combat and performance. He had become a symbol not of failure but of awakening. Still, the sting of shame lingered. Each replay of Marcus Hale's counterstrike replayed in Alex's mind with brutal clarity. He had walked into Arlington believing he was unstoppable. He had walked out knowing he had never truly understood strength. One evening, Alex laced up his gloves and entered his private training studio. The mirrors reflected a fighter's body, but not a fighter's spirit. He jabbed at the heavy bag, kicks snapping through the air. His form was sharp, flawless even, but his heart wasn't in it. Halfway through a routine, he stopped, hands resting on his knees. His breaths were ragged, not from exhaustion, but from frustration. "What am I even doing?" he muttered. He sat down on the mat, sweat dripping, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He thought of Marcus's calm eyes, of the silent rows of white headstones behind him. He thought of Colonel Ford's words, "They fight for survival, not for applause." For the first time, Alex realized he wanted that kind of strength, not the kind measured in belts, but in purpose. The next morning, Alex called his manager. "Cancel my next fight," he said flatly. "What?" The manager shouted. "Alex, this is your comeback. You need to flip the narrative, not hide from it." Alex shook his head even though the man couldn't see him. "I don't need a comeback. I need to figure out who I am without the cameras. Fighting for applause nearly destroyed me. I'm not going down that road again." The manager groaned, but Alex ended the call. For once, he felt certain. In the days that followed, Alex immersed himself in research. He read about the tomb guards, about their training, their sacrifices, their creed. "My standard will remain perfection." Each line struck him deeper. Their discipline wasn't for glory. It was for something larger than themselves. He began writing in a journal, something he hadn't done since childhood. The first entry was simple. "I thought strength was about domination. Now I know it's about devotion." A week later, Alex attended a veterans outreach program quietly, without cameras or announcements. He wore plain clothes, blending into the crowd. The room was filled with men and women whose scars, some visible, others invisible, told stories heavier than any belt he had ever won. When he was asked to share his experience, Alex hesitated. Then slowly he stood. "I thought I was strong," he began, voice unsteady. "I thought winning fights made me invincible. But then I met a man at Arlington who showed me what strength really looks like. It's not in titles. It's not in trophies. It's in standing guard for something bigger than yourself. It's in silence and sacrifice." The room listened quietly. A veteran in the front row gave a single nod, eyes softening. For Alex, it felt like the first sign of redemption. That night back home, Alex returned to his journal. His entry was longer this time. "I can't erase what I did, but I can honor what I learned. My fight isn't in the ring anymore. My fight is with myself, against my own ego, my own pride. If I win that, maybe I'll finally know what strength really means." He closed the book, exhaling slowly. For the first time since Arlington, sleep came easily. The lesson lingered, sharp and permanent. The champion had fallen, but in the silence that followed, a man was beginning to rise. Months passed since that fateful day at Arlington. The world had moved on to other stories, other scandals. But for Alex Chen, the memory of Marcus Hale's strike remained etched into his chest, like a scar that never faded. It wasn't just the pain, it was the meaning behind it. He had stopped fighting professionally. His belts gathered dust, his name faded from headlines. But Alex didn't care. Instead, he traveled. Not for tournaments, but for learning. He sought out veterans groups, martial arts dojos focused on philosophy, and even meditation retreats. Everywhere he went, he asked the same question. What is true strength? Each answer shaped him, chipped away at his old arrogance. Strength, he learned, was in patience, in humility, in protecting others, not just yourself. One crisp autumn morning, Alex found himself back in Washington, D.C. He hadn't planned it as redemption. He wasn't naive enough to believe one trip could erase his mistakes. But something pulled him back to Arlington. Perhaps it was unfinished business. Walking through the rows of white headstones, Alex felt smaller with each step. The silence pressed against him. Not the silence of shame this time, but of reverence. Families knelt by graves, placing flowers. Veterans stood with hands on their hearts. Alex bowed his head as he walked, humbled. And then he saw him, Marcus Hale. The sergeant was there, as steady as ever, his boots clicking against the marble in perfect rhythm. 21 steps, pause, turn, 21 steps. His rifle gleamed in the autumn light. The world around him blurred into silence, and Alex froze, heart pounding. For a long time, Alex just watched. The guard didn't falter, didn't acknowledge him. He didn't need to. His march was not for Alex, it was for the unknowns, for history itself. Still, Alex felt he couldn't leave without trying. When the changing of the guard began and Marcus was relieved, Alex approached cautiously. He knew better than to step too close, staying behind the rope. When Marcus finally exited the plaza, Alex spoke. His voice was quiet, respectful. "Sergeant Hale." Marcus turned slightly, his eyes meeting Alex's. There was no hostility in them, only calm. Alex swallowed hard. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed to come back, to say thank you for teaching me what strength really means." Marcus studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, in that same steady tone Alex remembered, he replied, "The tomb teaches. I only protect it." Alex nodded, emotion rising in his chest. "Still, it changed me." Marcus gave the faintest nod, a gesture not of friendship but of acknowledgement. Then, without another word, he walked on. His duty awaited. Alex stood there long after Marcus had gone, staring at the tomb. He realized he didn't need more words. The silence was the lesson. That evening, Alex wrote his longest journal entry yet. "I came back to where I fell. But I didn't find shame here. I found purpose. The silence of Arlington isn't empty, it's full. Full of sacrifice, of honor, of lives that gave me the freedom to even chase belts and applause. Marcus wasn't fighting me that day. He was protecting this silence. And now, I think I finally understand what it means to fight for something bigger than myself." Months later, Alex launched a foundation, not for fighters, but for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. He used his name, his platform, and even the notoriety of his Arlington humiliation to draw attention. He gave speeches not about his victories in the ring, but about the day he lost and what it taught him. The response was overwhelming. Veterans who had once scorned him began to shake his hand. Young fighters wrote letters saying they had reevaluated why they trained. Parents thanked him for teaching humility in a world obsessed with showmanship. Alex never glorified himself. He always ended his speeches the same way. "I am not the hero of this story. The heroes are the ones who never came home, and the men and women who stand guard in silence so they will never be forgotten." One evening, Alex returned to his old training gym. The heavy bag still hung. The mat still smelled of sweat and rubber. Young fighters gathered around, expecting drills, expecting to learn kicks and punches. But Alex shook his head. "Before you throw a single strike," he told them, "ask yourself why. If it's for applause, it will fade. If it's for ego, it will break you. But if it's for something greater, for discipline, for protection, for respect, then it will last forever." The students nodded, their wide eyes reflecting the weight of his words. For Alex, it was enough. Back in Arlington, Marcus Hale continued his march. Step after step, season after season, year after year. He never sought recognition. He never needed applause. His silence spoke louder than any victory, and somewhere, far from the Marble Plaza, a humbled fighter carried that silence with him, letting it guide every step of his new life. In the end, it wasn't a punch that defined Alex Chen. It was the lesson that followed. That true strength lives not in domination, but in devotion. Not in the roar of a crowd, but in the quiet of sacrifice. The tomb remained eternal. The guard remained vigilant. And Alex? He had finally learned to listen to the silence.